Hi, Rod Kane here from the Washington Grand Company. Here again to do another video about Triumph. And today I want to talk a little bit about basing. I did a video before about basing and why we do the bases that use the bases and the base size we use in Triumph. And I want to talk a little bit more about it today because we've had questions from people that are playing and trying to use old armies. As I'd mentioned in my previous video, we chose 40 millimeter scale for 15s as a recommended size because so many people have the older WRG style basing. But what I want to talk about today is what if your figures aren't based that way? What if you don't want to rebase them? How does it affect the game? And what other options do I have available to help me so I can play Triumph, or maybe even play Triumph in other games that use the older style basing? So I'm going to zoom in on the miniatures, and we're going to talk a little bit about basing and options for basing and how can I utilize my miniatures in as many games as possible. So I hope you'll stick with me, and we'll zoom in on the table a little bit. So let's start with the different base sizes in Triumph. So we have essentially 4 different base sizes. I mentioned this in one of our other basing videos to talk about the troop types. We have what will be the close order foot base. This is the open order foot base. This is the open order mounted and the really open order loose foot, so Beau Levy and Rabble, for example. And then we have the square base, which is for artillery, cataphracts, war wagons, so basically, and horde, the largest of the bases that we use. So one of the things that we try to do in Triumph for going to tournaments, for ease of troop identification, to make sure that people actually can understand what the troops are, not only their army, but easily recognize their opponent's army, is we try to go with some standardization. So, horde, we like 7 or 8 guys on a square base. Cataphracts, 4 figures on a square base. Lightfoot tends to be 3 infantry on this narrower base. Rabble looks a lot like Lightfoot, but the idea is that they're on the deeper base. So people are asking from time to time, well, what if I don't have the exact number of troops, or what if I don't have the exact base sizes? So I want to kind of cover the WRG heritage basing first, because this is where you're going to run into the most likely problem. In the WRG system, converting over to Triumph, there's going to be troop types that either weren't in the WRG system you're using, or they were based slightly different. So for example, the Horde tends to be on this base. Your Lightfoot tend to be on this base, no problem. But there is no such thing as Rabble, which is on this deeper base. And people ask, well, why are the base steps so important? So probably I should cover that, since we're talking about base steps in this video and how do you implement them on the table. The base steps are important because it has to do with how the figures fall back, how they pursue, and how much physical space they take on the table, and also how much space they need to fall back comfortably without being dissipated or destroyed in the game. So for example, Lightfoot, close order foot tend to fall back smaller amounts, take up less space, and they can tend to stand a few fallbacks before they'll disperse. Horde and Rabble, obviously there's something blocking this Horde. It needs a lot more space to fall back. Horde's a lot more brittle. It's going to disappear. A similar thing for the Rabble. The Rabble, if you had the end of a line, for example, you'll see that the Rabble obviously doesn't have much chance to disperse, which affects how brittle it is, and that's because it's a Rabble. But a question even came up about why do some lighter troops like open order mounted knights or light horse have a similar problem, and that they can't fall back. And part of the reason for that is just the physical size of the bases and the need for the figures to fit on the base, but part of it also is the fast-moving light troops like knights, other ones, light horse. Once they start to disperse because they can't fall back and they can't stay in a group or formation, once they scatter, those fast-moving light troops are going to tend to stay scattered or continue scattering to get away from the peril. So it also has a lot to do with how far things follow forward. So for example, if the lights or the horse are fighting against mounted, and the mounted falls back its base depth. And if this was a unit that was pursuing, it won't pursue. Okay, so if it doubled light foot or light horse, it won't make it into contact again. So what I'm trying to point out with that is that the base depth has a lot of effect on how the game plays. So if you really want to play Triumph the way it was intended, but let's say you have some older figures or some figures that aren't based exactly the right way, but you have, let's say, a WRG collection, there's a lot of ways that you can easily simulate the same troop types and the same effect with your WRG figures in a less than permanent way. Let's say you want to switch back and forth between a couple different systems. So for example, one of the units that we have in Triumph is Beau Levy. Well, what's the problem with Beau Levy? They don't exist in some of the other games. It's a unique troop type to Triumph. Low quality, open order bow. Sometimes that's going to be archers, and sometimes that's going to be skirmishers. So in the legacy WRG style basing, for example, they're very typically based like this. So hence the problem. One, there's only 2 guys on the stand. That's not as big of a deal as the fallback, as long as you and your opponent know what they are. But they're on the wrong depth. So one of the ways to fix that is to, quite simply, without rebasing, just get yourself some, this happens to be felt that I'm using here because it looks nice, some double-sided tape, and tape a larger piece of felt to the bottom base or cardboard or something of that nature, and you can recreate that same effect of having that deeper base already built into the figure. It's not too ostentatious, it doesn't stick out too bad, it allows you to play the game easily. Some people might even write on the back of this, if it was cardboard or whatever, that this is Rabble now, so they know that. Let's say these end up being Beau Levy. If you want to get a little fancier, some people make these Sabot bases where they would take a wooden base and then just add a front and back to it, maybe magnetize it, and then the part, the troop sits right in there, and you now have your skirmisher converted into a Beau Levy base, essentially. So there's a lot of different ways to make that up on the table, and then of course you can flock this to match the base and make it look really good, or you can do just something a little bit more innocuous, like a piece of green felt, so it's not really noticeable on a table. If you're playing on a big felt table, it might blend in completely. So there's ways to take these base sizes and make them bigger. And essentially, most of the bases in Triumph are going to involve that. They're going to involve taking a troop type, like let's say you've got some heavily armored mounted that happen to be classified as cataphracts, and putting them on a bigger base. I can't think of too many, if any, where the figures you have based up are going to need a smaller base. So you're not going to find that you have your skirmishers based this way, and in Triumph, these guys will really be classified as something with a smaller base. That's just not going to happen. So it's always going to be going upsize base. So that's an easy problem to solve. There is another issue that's come up too, is that there are people that are playing other games. These happen to be Warhammer Ancients. These are based on Warhammer Ancients base. And this is another reason why we went for this 80mm base type. Was recommended highly when we were looking at this. Was you notice that I've got 4 Warhammer bases mounted on this base, just a temporary try them out in a Triumph battle, and they fit because they're 20mm wide. There's 4 of them, so that's the tightest density. So one of the things you can do too is you can make a magnetic base like this one, where these 4 Warhammer Ancients or skirmish figures, Saga, whatever, fit on my Triumph base, so I can play Triumph with them. But I can still take them off and play a skirmish game where I need them individually mounted. You can do that obviously with, there's lots of different ways to magnetize. It depends on whether your figures have got magnets on them or whether they're based on metal. So there's many different ways to handle this problem. And the other one that comes up too is sometimes people are basing on these old 60s. So you can see here's 4 28mm figures crammed onto what would be the 60mm proportional base. Oh, but my friend based all his on 80s. Well, that's no problem. You can do exactly the same thing. Just stick them on this base. If you want, you can magnetize the base temporarily to make it easier to move them around, but so you can easily adapt up and down. So what I wanted to stress in this video was that yes, we do think it's important to use the base sizes that we've designed for the game, And also it's important that your base sizes are compatible with your opponent's army. If you go with the 40 millimeter, the 60 millimeter, or the 80 millimeter bases, and if you have an older system or a system where you want some flexibility, there's a lot of different ways that you can creatively stick these figures on a base. And like I said, one of the simplest, just take a piece of felt or a piece of cardboard, double-sided tape. I can peel this right off later when I don't want to use it anymore. But in the meantime, I'm playing Triumph with an accurately modified troop base. A little fancier, make an actual wooden base that your base can set right in. And now I can easily take this out and play another game that requires me to have a base this way and put that aside until I want to play Triumph again. So I think that a lot of you probably have already thought of these ideas to try and modify your bases, but I know some people have been asking on the forum about it, and they've also been asking about why are the base depths important. So I thought it was worthwhile to point out why are the base depths important, and some simple ways that you can take your legacy armies or your skirmish armies and still play Triumph with them. If you find that a lot of people have, like, for example, a Saga army out there, your Saga army probably is close enough to a 48-point Triumph army that with just some Sabbath bases like this and magnetic stand, you can easily be playing a game of Triumph. So anyway, my name is Rod Kane. This game is called Triumph, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And once again, if you got any questions, go out on the forum, go out on Facebook, and feel free to ask away. Questions about basing, questions about different ideas for making them, or if you can just post your pictures of ideas of how you make your different bases, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching.